just acknowledging it doesn't make you wrong. Like, we're all born how we're born, right? And we have the history that we have. Excuse me. So it's not our fault that uh, we're born into this situation, whether it's the positive or negative side of these divides, but it is our fault if we don't do anything about it, I think is the thing.
Welcome, my people, to the Double V From War to Activism podcast. And today I have a special guest, Zachary Cam, an activist in the Chicagoland area in Chicago. But before we start, I have to get some stuff off my chest, people. I have to talk about this World Cup FIFA. Obviously, I'm a soccer fan, a huge soccer fan, but I've never seen it so corrupt. So corrupt. It's always been corruption, but this one was over the top. And Infantino, the FIFA president, is a straight bootlicker. It was really tough to cheer for the United States this year because of all the things that are going on. And what really killed it for me was the red card that, the suspension of the player, Blinken. And it tells you how politics do play in sports, right? In sports washing. I like how when the MAGA people or the very conservatives people always say, keep politics out of sports. But politics has always been part of sports, all the way from Jackie Robinson to unions in sports that nobody really talks about. They don't talk about that. And the World Cup is, a lot of fascist dictators in the past have used that as a shield to show how great their country is when there's issues going on, like the 78 World Cup, the junta there and the dictatorship, Mussolini in 1934. So, and also we have to talk about that Peace Prize that Donald Trump got from VVAW. It was absolutely ridiculous. And I see Cam already cracking up about it. So, tickets, they were all-time high. It was expensive. I think the, last minute ticket was $10,000. And the average ticket was like, just for an average team, like let's say Paraguay versus Senegal, was like, you're talking about like $4,000. So, and that's another problem. Viva's goal was to make $11 billion, but they made $15 billion from this. So, and a lot of the fans were complaining, about the ticket prices. Former players were talking about that too, but it's like, you're complaining about it, but you're buying the ticket, right? So if you keep on buying the ticket, they don't care, just don't buy the ticket and maybe they will, get the point, right? That's what it's all about, right? Because about people like them, what hurts them, and when you get their attention is the buck. So, but I really had to get off my chest. I did really enjoy the game because I really like to see the game. It's a beautiful game besides, all the politics and money. But anyways, I had to get that off on my chest. Anyways, here we go, Cam. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Zachary Cam. I'm a Marine Corps veteran.
I was in from 2010 to 2014 and did 2 deployments to Afghanistan doing counter IED work. Um, I'm gonna cut you off asking me the next question because it's gonna be how I got into activism, and that's kind of more what I would talk about than my own pedigree, if you will. Um, so I started really paying attention. I knew about the Palestine situation for a long time. You know, Zionism is a distinct uh, political philosophy from the religion of Judaism, and the what I was most in tune with was like the imbalance, the asymmetry of their fighting capabilities, and seeing through the propaganda of, oh, they're shooting rockets back and forth at each other. And it's like, yeah, well, one is bathtub rockets and the other is truck mounted laser guided uh, you know, lots of heavyweight rockets. So they like do this thing to obfuscate and to make it seem like it's a war. Um, then October 7th happened and I got way more involved. Um, like a lot of vets, I thought that my part in Middle Eastern wars would make it where I was not welcomed or valued in the activist spaces, especially like the pro-Palestine one. Um, but you know, it turns out to be the exact opposite because you know, we have a powerful voice and a lot of status in this country, and people listen to us. So it's important for us to use our voices. So at that time, I was just going to be a body in the crowd, you know, show up, do the chants, be there. And then Aaron Bushnell made his sacrifice, and I realized that I couldn't just be on the sidelines anymore. No matter what I do, if I get arrested, if I get beaten, none of that is as bad as being on fire. So, like, if he was willing to do that to stop this, then I should be willing to do anything up into that. I was willing to die in Afghanistan for absolutely fucking nobody. I hope I can cuss on your podcast because I'm gonna do it a lot. But yeah. So if I was willing to go over there and potentially die, then I should be willing to risk anything and everything to stop a genocide and work towards an egalitarian society here.
Yeah, I mean that's really that's really inspiring, and you know how you started paying attention, and then you got more involved in what particular organizations did you get involved with at first? And
So I am the crew rep for the Chicago chapter of About Face Veterans Against the War. Um, that's a phenomenal organization that you were a part of at one time. That's a group of post 9/11 veterans who um, understand that U.S. militarism is not the answer to anything, and our imperial ambitions um, put us at risk and obviously kill millions of people around the globe. And then, sort of an offshoot of that is I'm helping to start what we're calling the Chicago Veteran Speaking Bureau. And
yeah,
it's a group of veterans that is going to, starting next year, go into schools and counteract recruiting efforts. And it's not that we're trying to talk anybody out of joining the military. We just want them to have the most complete picture from somebody who has lived it, as opposed to a recruiter who has a vested interest in lying to you, um, you know, only talking about the good parts, never talking about the bad parts. And, you know, even the recruiting system is rife with abuse, both sexual, hazing, all that stuff, because they're in a position of power and they have, you know, power over whether you get to do what you want, like join the military. As you probably know, Chicago is the most militarized school system in America. We have 39 military schools, academies, and JROTC programs just in the city. Um, Across the country, there are 3,500 programs, and they're looking to build that to 6,000. So
Yeah.
almost doubling their recruitment efforts. They say by their own admission, 20% of JROTC cadets join the military in some regard. But all of their publications say that it's not a recruiting effort. But how can you say that when it's called an officer training corps?
Yeah.
uh, and they tout these things like structure and discipline and all these things, which are good, they're valuable things, but like, why does that have to be intrinsically linked to the military, and why isn't that just part of the curriculum of public school anyways, you know, in order to achieve anybody's goal, whether that be the military or college or uh, the trades, anything.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's yeah, the military schools and just it's and they always go for like one thing that bothers me, and I'm particularly talking about my city of Chicago. It's they a lot of a lot of a lot of the students are minority kids, right? Kids of
Yeah,
color and stuff. So even when we have our little Memorial Day parade, they're all kids of color. So
yeah,
I started looking at that because I used to go to those parades early on, and stuff, and they're nice how they put the events and stuff, but it's like, these are kids that are kids of color, like 90% of them, and and then it's like basically saying that this is the only way you can succeed in life. And then like when these kids come back and, like, come back to, whatever their enlistment or anything like that, then they're kind of rejected in society, right? When they want
yeah,
things and for the community. So it's like, it's really hypocritical, and they speak their mind or they just want basic living situations for their families. So it really bothers me when I see that and everything. And so it's like pretty hypocritical.
yeah. I
But
mean,
as
they
for,
call it
go
they
ahead,
call
go
it the
ahead.
economic draft for a reason. If they
Yes,
can't draft people through paperwork, they'll draft them through necessity.
right.
And I think an important thing is for us to study the history of anti-war movements and people like Muhammad Ali, um, and just relaying that and taking inspiration from that and applying it to today.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning Muhammad Ali, who's an amazing activist, very great person, beautiful person, and he lived in Chicago for a very long time because he was part of the
Yeah,
Nation of Islam. They actually still have his home in the South Side. And at that time when he did that, he was, it was like Colin Kaepernick, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
people hated him and all that stuff. But, uh years later, he became a hero, right? He became,
yeah,
yeah, like when he actually, I remember in '96 when he actually had the torch and everything like that. And unfortunately, by that time, when he finally got all his due, for what he did, and activism, he couldn't speak anymore. So,
mm,
but yeah, that just tells you a lot about society and history, right? Me personally, as a historian, history looks back at certain situations and you just look back and you're saying, this ain't, yeah, this ain't good.
yeah. They do a wonderful job of washing that all away and pretending like they were supportive of it the whole time.
Yeah.
Like Martin Luther King Jr. is a great
Hmm.
example of that. He was hated in his time. Um, but now he's held up as this hero, and like he is, don't get me wrong. But like while it's happening, while these people are doing their things, they're oftentimes like demonized and misrepresented in what they want. And it kind of ties down back to what you were talking about in your intro about the politics of sports. And since we're two veterans, like, um, it's crazy that, overt public statements or support of a political party is sort of not cool or whatever, but everybody gets together and watches the Jets fly over, and we have members of the military or ROTC, JROTC cadets do the flag walkout. Like, the military is so uniparty that, like, it's not even considered to be a political statement, but it's really just brainwashing us to always be in lockstep with whatever war they want, and they use it. You know.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you for mentioning Martin Luther King, because he was very important to Chicago. He was, when he came up here, the Chicago movement. I tell everybody to study that, and he did his civil rights in the South, and then he brought it up to the North, you know, um, to fight for housing discrimination and all that. And he dealt with the machine here, and
Yeah.
and its own racism. And at that time, they hated him in Chicago. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
They actually even threw a rock at him in Marquette Park, where I used to play soccer. And he said that it's worse over here than down south. He never dealt with that, dealt with something like that before. Think about that. And that whole history. And I think that people should listen to. He has a great speech at an event called the Colleges of New Politics, something like that. Check it out on
Hmm.
YouTube. It's great. He talks about the Chicago machine and how that works and everything like that. And even like the black aldermen, were we called them plantation aldermen back then, because they would say yes sir to uh Father Daley, and they told Martin Luther King, don't come up here. So they turned their back on him too. So thank you for putting that example. When people are doing that at that moment, they're not very popular, but then years later they become these iconic heroes, and people that fought for people like me and you, and gave us guidance. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
And I really started appreciating Martin Luther King even more, because people don't realize he was starting to become even more progressive.
Hmm.
And you know it's funny when we talk about this, when he started talking about the war, how it was wrong.
Yeah.
That's really when people really started disliking him, and I personally think that that costed his life. When he
Oh
started
yeah.
talking about the war and people's campaign and stuff, they're like, "Oh, you just crossed the line," So,
Yeah.
and it was his wife that actually pushed him. She was part of the anti-war movement before. She's like, kind of pushed him, and finally he just said, I have to speak out, saying I have to speak out what's wrong about this. So, and
Yeah.
but yeah, it's how everything is all connected in one way or the other, from civil
Yeah.
rights to anti-war and all that kind of stuff. So, but let's kind of change the subject a little bit here, and let's
Sure.
talk about ice. Yeah. So tell me how you feel, what you're doing, and and all that good
Um,
stuff.
well, I think ICE is the greatest example right now of how, if they're willing to do it to anybody across the world, they're willing to do it to you. It's just not your turn yet. And so, we've spent hundreds of years, really, from the inception, destroying communities, um, you know, setting up death squads, rounding people up, and it just hadn't come back to us. The boomerang was a far way away. Even in our time, that it was all the way out in the Middle East, but it always comes back. And so now we're seeing the same tactics that the military used in the Middle East, that specifically Israel used in in Palestine. Um, those training tactics are being taught to ICE and then being used against the American public. And just to prove the point that it's like just not your turn yet, I think is most exemplified by the fact that there was two people shot and killed in Chicago by ICE
Yeah,
months before they went up to the Twin Cities. And because they were minorities, um, it was not covered as much. And then it became white people's turn, with the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and it caused this huge uproar, which is great. I think that anything that gets people mobilized and activated is a good thing, but it just does bear some reflection of like why, why at this moment um, does that have to be what changes people's minds? But so it always comes back. It starts with people overseas, then they do it to minorities here, and then white people, and then eventually it's just going to keep happening, and it's only going to get worse. I always think back to the fact that, this is obviously like American propaganda, but like the shot heard around the world right before the revolution is the British army shot a protester, and that's what they say started the American Revolution. There's obviously way more in that, but like how many
Mhm.
protesters do we have to watch get beaten and killed and kidnapped before we start realizing that they speak two languages, which you referred to earlier is money, and the second is violence.
Yeah, no, that's excellent, excellent, good riff. Um, yeah, I mean, talking about that, that the first person that killed was Christopher Addicks, who was black.
Yes.
So
Hmm.
that's how ironic it is, right? But they don't really
Yeah.
tell you about that very much, and that's a very good point. Yeah, it's and you're right. It's like and don't get me wrong, with Good and Preddy and all that stuff. But you're definitely right where it became an uproar and a turning point. But I think that just comes from the media and and the how how minorities are, how they're portrayed. We're portrayed less, like black people, my community, they'll rather care about a dog, and I love dogs, don't
Yeah.
get me wrong, than black
Yeah.
people, or people of color, you know what I'm saying? So, that's how it's a mental thing too. Like, oh, they shot these are good white people, they got good jobs and everything, and you know so that has a lot to do with it too, of our history of race and who, a caste system, like who's more important and everything. But you're right, it affected everybody. It was like, I was telling people, I'm like, it's going to come to you, it's going to come to you. They did that in South Shore.
Yeah.
They raided that place, and I was telling black community they're going to come after us, next and stuff. And when they interviewed the person that they interviewed was a veteran and stuff,
Hmm.
and he was going into details about what they did and how they zip tied the children and such and such. So but I was really, really angry when those two killings, right?
Yeah.
In Houston and in Maine. One was a Mexican national, and then the other one, I believe, was a Colombian national. And they were the wrong people. And then to top it off, you have, I'm going to go back to my intro. You have the World Cup, right? And
Yeah.
all this stuff, you have the World Cup going on, and this, showing how great our country is, and you're killing people on the street that are playing for your team,
Yeah.
and most of these, these soccer teams or national teams, most of them that play on those teams are like people of color,
Hmm.
so it's like, it's really hypocritical. And so it's crazy. And then when I was watching Telemundo, because let me tell you something, I watch my soccer in Spanish. It's so much more
Yeah.
than watching in English, and English so boring. And it's like, they're
Yeah.
not, I understand not being like, but you didn't mention any of this at all. You know what I'm saying? A
Hmm.
little bit. I'm not talking about this is like, a political show or this, but just mentioning it. And this is your community getting taken out on the street, so it's crazy. But yeah, I was really, really upset, with that going on and everything. So yeah, it's I was very proud of our city. I was proud of Minneapolis standing up, um for the undocumented and just for people in general, right? But I think the notion is that when this is over, we should be doing this, hopefully if it gets over, that we should be doing this all the time, right? We should be
Yeah.
doing this for the Black community. You saw what happened in Madison, Wisconsin. This
Yes.
happens all the time, but I think that the notion is that we're always the criminal in everything. So they're the
Yeah.
bad guy, right? So, and I think a difference too is, I have to point this out, is that it started like when people were getting taken off the streets, they were in white communities. These people were
Yeah.
working and, cutting their grass and everything. So they saw it up front, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is something we've been talking about for many, many, many years. And then you're
Yes.
going out and kidnapping people without a warrant and stuff. And that just gives them to do, just do whatever they want, right? And stuff.
Yep.
So you're not coming in my house without a warrant. You got
Yeah.
to show me that warrant. That's what I told my alderwoman. You got to come in with a warrant and everything like that, because they had the no knock, thing, and ordinance, and so. But yeah, it's unfortunate, and it's a Gestapo. That's what it is.
Yeah.
You know, to scare people and everything like that. So we'll see. We'll see. It's really, really, really crazy thing right now.
Yeah,
So
I think you brought up the distractions and how people are more focused on the World Cup while all these horrible things are happening in our communities. And it brings back the whole Roman bread and circuses thing. They keep, as long as you're fed and you're distracted, then you don't care what's going on. But
right.
as especially the Iran war goes on, things are getting more expensive. And one of those things, like you were talking about in the intro, is sports. You can't even go. Normal people can't go to sports, and it's not just the World Cup. I've looked into Bears tickets and stuff, and it's horrifyingly expensive. Like, especially if you want to take a family, like you want to take 3 or 4 kids with you, like that's not achievable for whatever. But then also, like, the bread is getting more expensive. We're seeing it now. There's the hookworm in the cattle. There's this stuff going on with the lettuce and the cyclosporus or whatever it's called. And so, like, food is getting harder to get. It's going to only get more expensive because we have centralized, food production that all relies on oil. And so as this conflict goes on, it's going to get more and more expensive. So I just hope that people use that as an opportunity to wake up and see who the actual enemy is, because it's not immigrants. It's not people across the country or across the world. It's the people in charge. Who makes these decisions, who wastes billions and billions and trillions of dollars that could, like, a very small fraction, a literal atom in a drop of water in the ocean that is our yearly budget, could be fixing the potholes by your house. Just as simple as that, to also, providing life and dignity to the people who live here, and everything in between.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like what Tupac says, you got money for wars, but you don't have money for the poor, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
it was a great quote what he said. Great artist and the rapper, and but yeah, no, I totally feel you, and it's just it's crazy that we're in this conflict right now. I think most Americans don't even want to be in this situation. We just dealt with 20 years of war. This is not this is recent too. So, and
Yeah.
now we're in another conflict. And just to think that this administration could, just say, hey, we can do this. We can do this to this country. I'm like, nah, this country has been prepared for years for this,
Yeah.
and, this, no offense to Venezuela, but this ain't Venezuela. This country can defend
Yeah.
itself, and, and it'll fight back. And it's just been crazy and chaos. We got American soldiers dying. We're destroying their country and civilians. Those 150, students.
Yeah,
What they were girl students, right?
the girls'
Yeah,
school. Yeah,
girls' school, and it's like you're talking. I like how they always talk about how, like, immigrants, how they, the murders of American citizens. Like,
Hmm.
let's count about all the murders of undocumented people, comparing out how many people we killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, or just recently with those 150, students and more,
Yeah.
and it's like, it's ridiculous. So, and we know that immigrants and undocumented people don't do, their crime, it's low, their statistics are lower because, one, they don't want to get deported. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Two, they want to be around their families because it's hard to come back. That's number one. So they're more law-abiding citizens, to this country and stuff. So
Yeah.
it's crazy. But I was really upset about that 19-year-old female soldier, army
Yeah.
soldier that got killed, because it's like, it's hypocritical. She's Latina, I believe, probably Mexican American, because she's from, I believe, the Dallas area. So she's over here, you know, overseas, and, representing the country. And then, and I'm not trying to laugh, but I'm laughing because it's hypocritical how Donald Trump is killing people that look like her. And then they
Hmm.
don't want, Pete Hegseth doesn't want females in the military. We all know that's, what that's all about. So it's
Yeah.
like, and, females, don't, his policy is pretty much what that is. And it's like, we just look what just happened,
Yeah.
so it's yeah, I was really, really upset. And she's a private, like, not even a
Yeah.
PFC, so it's
I've got really mixed feelings about all this because,
mhm.
having been there, it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that they would have been right to kill me i- if they
Yeah,
had while
yeah,
I was there. And so, like, to anybody listening, if you don't want to get killed by Iran, don't join the military
yeah,
because they have no interest in like harming civilians here. They've made that abundantly clear. The only thing that they said that they would do to civilians is hack the bank websites and forgive all of our debts.
yeah,
Like, so like it's obviously a tragedy to her and her family, but also it's a recognition of you know, I don't know the reasons she joined for. A lot of people, it's for college, stability, benefits, but
mhm,
like at what cost? That's the risk you take, Um, just realize that one of my favorite things to like muse upon both politically and in my own life is things only happen when people wake up and do them. You know, Pete Hegseth is not going to go in and fight this war. Certainly not the senators and all the politicians. They're not going to put on their flak jacket and start doing patrols through Iran. So it's only when we realize that this all is happening, from capitalism to war to racism, and everything down to whether or not you clean your house or do your laundry. It only happens when you do it, you know? And so like we can make that decision, like we were kind of talking about before, is like, will this activate people? And it's like, not unless people do it. And so that I think that like being veterans and trying to take the lead and taking what we can from the military and using that to inspire the people and use our leadership skills to organize and set out plans and have realistic expectations and stuff like that is just super important.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, like on a personal level, it's a tragedy. It
yeah,
sucks. I can't imagine, and my condolences go out to her family, but like, uh, they had every right to do it. We did it to them, so why shouldn't they do it back? It shouldn't matter just because she's an American. Um, when we blatantly target civilians, and so she was in the military. She's a legitimate target, and that sucks to say. I don't like that, but because I still have family who's in, and I would not like it if they died. But also, they're in the military. They're a legitimate target. So it,
right, right. Well, I'm on the same page with you. I remember someone told me a long time ago, when I first got into activism. How would you feel if someone comes to your backyard, right? You're gonna
Yeah.
defend, yeah. So,
Hmm.
and as we were talking, like, like military schools, I believe she was in JROTC, and she, I don't know the reasons why she joined, but it's probably for economic reasons, for college money, and it's like a backdoor draft. She's a person of color,
Hmm.
and the opportunity. So, um and this tells you how the rich uses the poor, right, and stuff, to go
Absolutely.
fight some nonsense war and everything. But at the end of the day, I just, my condolences to her family, and I just wish him the best and stuff. So,
Yeah. Same.
it's tough. It's tough to see. So, and I think for me, I always have a problem when someone dies young. When you're old, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you lived your life, but when you're young like that, it's like you haven't even experienced life yet. So, it's unfortunate, but that's the consequences and stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
And
we're
that's
just reaping what we sowed, you
yeah.
know?
And that's why it's important that we bring out that message so these things don't happen and stuff. So
Yeah.
it's tough. But let me change the subject a little bit. And I think this is more your kind of thing right here. And we'll talk about the genocide in Gaza and APAC. So where do you want to start?
Well, um, I think that it's really hard to stay focused with how many things are fucked up in this world. We just talked about a lot of them. Um, and it's important just that we don't forget that the genocide didn't stop when the news stopped covering it, or when your algorithm shifted to ICE things or Epstein things. And just to try to support them and never give up the message and never stop fighting for them in whatever way that is for you. Um, I was in Egypt uh, in the summer of 24 helping Palestinian refugees, and it's horrifying. All the things that you don't see, the things that you do see on social media are um, some of the worst things that you could ever see. Dead kids, buried people. But then you see the impact it has on the people, like on an, um, right in front of you. I was helping out with a family, and there was like a 2-year-old, and every time a plane would fly over, and we were in Cairo, so it was often, he would just like go glossy-eyed and like cover his head because that's what he knows planes do. And that's just the most heartbreaking thing I've ever seen. It's like that dead look that my friends get sometimes with fireworks or backfiring engine or something, and they just like kind of get teleported back. And it's it's a modern day Holocaust, and we can never forget about that, and we can never stop fighting for it just because things happened here. And the truth is, like, they're all intertwined, like we've been talking about with ICE. They train there. With the police brutality, a lot of police departments train there. The New York Police Department has an office in Tel Aviv, which doesn't make any fucking sense. Um, so yeah, just don't forget. I have Free Palestine written on my hat, so it's just like a
Mhm.
constant reminder to people. And it starts a lot of conversations, I think, and just it's hard to keep up with everything when everything is going wrong and there's so much bad news coming through. And that's part of it, is like if they overload you, then you sort of give up, you stop caring, you can't care anymore.
Mhm.
Like you're burnt out, and we don't have the social structures and the community to help people deal with that. And so a lot of people are just sitting at home, um, watching all this, and they don't have people to talk to about it, and they don't have support in that way. So like that would be, my biggest thing to encourage people to do is you don't have to jump right into activism or protesting or anything like that. Just build community and make sure that you're there for people who are having a hard time,
Mhm.
um, because that ends up usually helping you with your hard time because you can share that burden, and many hands make light work, right? Um, I don't know if you want to jump in there before I get specifically to APAC.
No, I appreciate that you don't have to be an activist. You just in your community and to talk to somebody, right? That's very, very important because not everybody's an activist,
Yeah.
like you know. But we all play a part, to try to make this world better and that try people that really do care about, the vulnerable, right? And I'm glad that you bring that up because once in a while I forget that my second cousins are Palestinian, so
Hmm.
and they're
Yeah.
about your age. I haven't talked to them in a very long time, but I just wonder. I've been thinking about them recently and like, how do they feel? I don't know if they're from Gaza or the West Bank. Doesn't matter, Palestinian. But it's ironic though that like, uh, you know, that their mother is like, all about police. You know what I'm saying? And where my people
Yeah.
get, messed up in to get, we know the history there. But maybe she changed. I don't know with all this stuff, going on in Gaza. So it's like you have to be if you want sympathy from people, you have to be sympathetic to other people and their and where they're from in their community. And I think that's a lot of times that doesn't go around and stuff, right? So I tell people from the Latino and Black community that I'm part of, and that's who I am, is that like, you say that you don't care what's going on over there, but like the way how we're treated is the way how they're treated over there. You know what I'm saying? It's all like
Yeah.
connected. So, you have to understand the struggle there and have to be have empathy and sympathy because they're they're killing people of color because there are people of color
Yeah.
there, right? So, but yeah, there's a lot of this is all intertwined. We're talking about, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
everything is. And, to your point about sympathy and empathy, like people who support the police are not really your enemy, right? Like they might disagree with you, but like the police are your enemy. The billionaires who control the police are your enemies. Like we can't allow these divides to be to the point where we don't talk to each other because that
Mhm.
just furthers divide. And like the real enemies are the people in power, and there is no greater power than money. And I would like to bring it back to another Chicago activist of great historical import, which is Fred Hampton and his Rainbow Coalition. And I
Yeah.
would just like to point out one thing that the Young Patriots was a group in uptown Chicago, where I am right now. And they were sort of a left leaning group of disenfranchised white people who came up from Appalachia. And
Yeah.
their vests and jackets had the Confederate flags on them. And I don't think that it would be unreasonable at all, and feel free to correct me, that black people in the 1960s would not be willing or that happy to interact with people with Confederate flags on. Um, but the Black Panthers chose to work with them and instead of like castigate them or alienate them because of these symbols, they worked with them and they said,
Mhm.
we're not going to fight fire with fire, we're going to fight fire with water. Um, and it was through working with them and realizing this class consciousness of who really is your enemy that the Young Patriots took the Confederate flag off their um,
Mhm.
jackets and vests. And so that should just be a lesson to all of us about how we disagree with people, but we have to keep the the real battle in mind because it's not between us and our neighbors or our relatives who we disagree with politically. It can be taxing. It often is to talk to these people, but in the end, they're not your enemy. They might support your enemy, but they're not like
Mhm.
the actual person who's
Yeah.
kicking people out of their house, who's sending ice raids, who's executing people on the street. Like, um, I think they're misguided, and they probably think I'm misguided, but. Uh, you know, it's important that we have those conversations. And try to just like bring people to the realization that um, the politicians don't have us our best interest in mind. And not to ramble on too much, but a friend of mine and I were at the bar on the 4th of July, and I wear my hat because I like to agitate and keep it all. So it says, no more rich man's war, but it's like on a Afghanistan veteran hat. I'm pretty sure you've seen it. It says free Palestine and choose peace. And it kind of pissed off this cop that was like sitting next to us at this bar. So I started talking to him and we were disagreeing. And then towards the end of it, I was like, look, do you want the politicians who are in power now to be the ones to send young kids off to war? And he said no. And I was like, then we agree. We don't have to sit, we don't have to be buddies, we don't have to talk ever, but we're ultimately on the right side or on the same side, you know. So just like trying to chip away and bring, logic and history and humanity into the conversation. That's the most important part.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of good points and stuff like that that you make, and I like that example of the Black Panthers when they work with. But I'm gonna have to push back a little bit and stuff. I'm
Sure.
gonna for Black community. I think what it is, and those are good examples. But I think the Black community in general, you know, um, they've been burnt so much, and just recently, like with the Civil Rights, Act, Section 2, that they are just, done and fed up. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So they're, like, we went through that. Like we went through our, Black Power, in the 60s and 70s, late 60s, 70s. And a lot of our, leaders got killed or went to jail for a very, very long time, where white activists, and this is true, where white
Yeah.
activists made deals with the government and became professors and all that. So I think we look at things more different and what we want. And we're very untrustworthy because over and over and over in history, and we're the kindest, we
Hmm.
are the most giving. That's the thing. And I think it's at a point where they're just like, that's why you don't see us out there, because we're like, well, we did what we need to do. You know what I'm saying? And like, we're done with this. You know what I'm saying? You got to figure it out. And I don't blame the Black community at all. You know what I'm
Me
saying? For
neither.
a lot of issues. And we deal with a lot of things are designed for us to worry about things that white community doesn't have to worry. We always have to worry about, and I'm not saying that they don't worry about that, but it's like, it's a huge wealth gap. We're worried about paying our rent. We're not at the town halls because we're worried about our children, on the street. So it's so much more, it's there's a lot of differences. And I think, if me and you walk to the Black community, they will tell you over and over and over, we have been giving, but we don't
Yeah.
give it back. So we're done,
Yeah.
so
I
it
think
goes
that's
both ways.
yeah, absolutely. And it's like I think it's really important to acknowledge that, like, when you're a part of the privileged group, like, that you do have to sort of prove yourself and your intentions through work. I think this shows up in any kind of group that's been discriminated against. So some people will come and they have the savior thing. It's like, now I have all the answers and I know
Uh,
how to fix things. Um, and just to like humble yourself and listen, um, to kind of give an example from my life is I went to an all boys high school and then I was in a combat unit in the Marines before they had women in those units. So like I had to learn a lot of, things about the life experience of women like well into my adulthood, you know? And so it's just like to honestly evaluate where your positions are, where your privileges are, and then not only just acknowledge them, but to like work against them and to try to unlearn those things and unlearn those habits and listen to the people who are affected. And I think that's really important. It shows up in like white leftist uh, sort of a lot where it's like, well, you should be doing this or you should be doing that. It's like, I I think our responsibility in those times is just to show up and relinquish this need for control or ownership or that we would be the heroes or whatever. I think that it's really important that like when I got in that like a lot of these pro-Palestine things were led by USPCN and other Palestinian groups. It's like, how do you want us to do this? You know,
Yeah.
like how um, and really taking their lead because like you're saying, I was arrested at a protest, but it's not anything like how black people have been arrested at protests. And so, like, just acknowledging, it doesn't make you wrong. Like, we're all born how we're born, right? And we have the history that we have. Excuse me. So it's not our fault that uh, we're born into this situation, whether it's the positive or negative side of um, these divides, but it is our fault if we don't do anything about it, I think is the thing. And I think the best way to do anything about it is to listen to those communities and how they want help.
No, that's excellent points. I mean, we're both making excellent, and I'll make a great point
Yeah, you do.
where I'll make a great point here. Graham Plattner, right? The guy, you
Yeah,
know what I'm saying? This is what black people talk about, and people of color,
yeah,
but especially black people. It's like, well, how are we gonna be, how are we gonna be allies and stuff when you knew what this guy was, and me and you, we
yeah,
know, we were in the service. We know those type of people. When you have
yeah,
a Nazi sign, a Nazi tattoo. And I
yeah,
understand that when you were young, back in 2006 or whatever, but you're a historian and you've had it that long, you know what I'm
yeah.
saying? And then,
That
but
wasn't an
it's,
accident.
you know, you know, you've had it that long and the white progresses, just let it go and
Hmm.
and he's like, oh, he's our guy because he's, an oyster person and that and blah, blah, blah. And then you start seeing other things build up, right? But
Yeah,
that should have been your marker right then and there, right there with
yeah,
that tattoo. You know what I'm saying? And then he made comments of people of color, and then he worked for Blackwater or whatever but like,
yeah,
afterwards, 4 tours and all that. It's just, but see, that's what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? This is what we complain about. It's like you just looked at the other way. This was your guy. This is the guy that's going to do everything and blah, blah, blah. But, but if that was a person of color or black, that person would have been done right then and
yeah.
there. So
Hmm.
this is what I'm talking about in general.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm saying with white, and don't get me wrong, I love my allies, but this is a problem with white lefties and progressives, right, and stuff
yeah,
you know of those kind of things. So but it's just like duh, like you could have told me and Cam from the start, like that's not the dude.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
you don't need a consultant and all that money for me and Cam to tell you, like, nah, you
yeah.
need to find someone else. You know?
I think that it's part of a coordinated effort to like stop any progress by giving us dog shit candidates. Like there's I mean it's Maine, so there's not that many people, but there are good people who want to make a difference who are in politics, but they give us these people that come with drama and obviously rape and Nazi tattoos are more than drama, but they come with this baggage. That makes it so they're basically bound to lose.
Yeah.
And then even if they aren't, like they're gonna pull the same thing, like, oh, he had to drop out just a little bit before the deadline, and so we couldn't get it. The Kamala Harris defense, basically. But like it looks like they're trying, but they're not. They give a little bit of lip service, but they'll never follow through, So they'll say these things about Medicare for all and all these things, but like they have no intention of letting these people win. They just want to give this air of being progressive, whatever the fuck that means. And it's a losing strategy, and they're in the business right now of losing elections because that's what keeps them in power. All this stuff, Democrats love what's happening. They love the war. They love ICE. Um, and I'm not talking about like the people who vote Democrat. I'm talking about the people with power within the Democrats, because they've been funding ICE every year that Donald Trump wasn't in office, even continuing like with Biden. They went back to giving it record funding. And so it's like, it's
Yeah.
obviously a shell game, where they put on, the proverbial Kenta cloth and kneel and give us some lip service, but then ultimately work against us, because it is a uniparty in that they all work for the same people and get money from the same people. So it's just like we have to wake up to that reality. I think is the most important thing. Is like the Democrats are not here to save us. They're here to stop us from going more to the left. And so that's why they're always willing to be like, where's the middle ground between us and Republicans? But it's never, how do we enact massively popular legislation like Medicare for all, free college? Those are even across the parties super popular that would win you elections. But they don't do it because they don't care. They want to be the left stop to make sure that this is the acceptable limit that will go as far as taking care of our own people or having a basic amount of dignity, and anything to the left of us, oh, they're just extremists or whatever. But then they're happy to work with Republicans on anything and everything.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. Not all Democrats, but we're talking about most of them, in there and stuff.
Enough to be a
Yeah, and
problem.
we're talking about people like, you know, I can go on in a rabbit hole about our own city, but we're talking about the
Oh
Rahm
yeah.
Emanuel's a perfect
Hmm.
example, right? Obama's pretty much, chief of staff, all those kind of like central Democrats, Paul Vallis types. We do have Democrats that are pretty progressive and stuff, but I think what Cam is saying is the overall, right? The majority of Democrats, they're corporate owns them, and they want these things to happen, and they fold or they kiss butt. You know what I'm saying
Yeah.
to the Republicans. I think that's what he's overall saying, and that's why we're here today. Where we're here, they're a mess.
I got to push back on the Obama thing, man, because he was killing kids in
no,
the
I
Middle East.
there's a lot of things that I didn't like about Barack Obama, okay, and stuff like that. No,
But like
a lot of things
all the
and
ICE
stuff.
stuff that we just talked about, this is all happening under Tom Homan, who was also the
No,
immigration
I
czar
know,
under
and I
Obama.
remember when they
So
and I remember when they pushed back on Obama too. They did that too, and then the difference is he got the message. You know what I'm saying? When people, but they don't talk about that. But that did happen when he was doing the same thing, not like the way how they're doing it, like just pulling people out. But he was deporting a lot of people, and at that time, I remember because I was part of Occupy Wall Street, all that stuff, and he got the message like, hey, you're getting a little out of control. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
So
I think
um
that putting a polite face on it is maybe even worse. It reminds me of the Malcolm X quote, which I'm about to butcher, but like he's like, "You always know what a wolf is going to do in the forest, but the fox comes up with you and moves his mouth like he's smiling and he invites you in." And he was talking about white liberals specifically, but I think it applies to any liberals. There's like, if I do this and I do it in the right way, where it's like, yeah, we're kidnapping people and deporting them, but we're not doing it at traffic stops, and we're not doing it in such a way that kicks the hornet's nest of popular opinion, then that's good. Like I think that, one, we have to see
yeah,
how we create these permission structures for these things to happen, because we're
yeah,
both older than ICE is. And like uh it it always goes a little bit at a time, like the parable about boiling the frog, and they get you used to this temperature, and they're like, yeah, well, I mean, deporting people violently is bad, and then they raise the temperature up a little bit, and it's like, yeah, I mean, you shouldn't like be killing them in the streets and stuff. And then like, what's the next point? All of the concentration camps in Nazi Germany began as deportation
hmm
centers. So like, where are we going to get to the point if we keep accepting and normalizing these things happening?
Yeah.
It's
Uh, that's a great quote you said, but we got to be careful because a lot of MAGA people use that. So you know what I'm saying? And we also have to remember, because I'm a Malcolm X person. He said that before he went to before Mecca, he changed a lot, right? He wouldn't even work with Malcolm X, and at the end, when he left the Nation of Islam, he started saying we need to start working with Martin Luther King. He started changing a lot, right? We need allies, so we got to be careful because I see MAGA use that a lot, right? And Malcolm X has said he said one of the thing that he would take back, or one of the biggest mistakes he ever said when he was actually speaking at a college where a white college. She was like a young college student, a woman. She asked, "Oh, how can we help?" And he said, "No, you can't do anything." And he regretted
yeah,
that. You know what I'm saying? So
sure,
we have to be careful when we say that. I see what you're saying, but they'll use that against lefties like us. You know what I'm saying too.
sure,
So yeah, so we have to put the history, because I'm a history guy. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
To the notion of why he was saying at the time and how he changed and his face, just like Martin Luther King. So, but it's right in some ways too. What you're saying, it's
But
true.
I
So,
mean, Martin Luther King Jr. had like a very similar quote in his letter from a Birmingham jail, where he like comes to a regrettable conclusion that his real enemy is the white moderate and not the Klansman or the city council member. Um, and so even if they're not perfect analogies to what's happening today or our concerns today, like we have to be cognizant of the ways that we can be tricked into and manipulated into supporting um, these things. And it goes back to like we were talking about, normalization of the militarization of everything,
yeah.
um, blind fidelity to uh, the military, all that stuff, and cops. All of our TV shows are propaganda. They're entertaining. I watch them too. But you just gotta like, realize what it's doing, and they're like trying to paint this picture that oftentimes has nothing to do with reality.
No,
Um,
absolutely. You're right. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's what do they call it? The colorblind, right? You know what I'm saying? But
yeah.
what is that really? Oh, we have to be all equal, but it really is. I think a better message what they're saying is that it's really, what the Trump administration is doing to, Civil Rights Act and all this stuff, funding is basically you're saying, oh, we're colorblind, everybody, should be equal. What you're really saying is, and I think what Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were saying is, you're really trying to just keep the power structure. That's what it
Yeah.
is. In a nice coded word, that's what it is, and I think that's
Yeah.
what they both were trying to basically say. Where most people, like, oh, racism. I always tell people all the time, racism is not just, when you say racist things. Racism is policy. That is
Hmm.
racism and stuff. And I think a lot of people don't, they don't understand that, like the average person, you know what I mean? And it's like, so that's what I think they were trying to say is like,
Sure.
keeping the power structure in a
Yeah.
colorblind society. Oh, we're all equal, why not? Affirmative action, blah, 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 this and that. But you're just trying to keep the power structure. That's all it is,
Yeah.
with nice coded words. But yeah, man, I mean, so we'll close it down because me and you could talk for hours.
Yeah.
Or,
And we do.
we do. So do you got anything to say? You want to say anything? You know, my whole thing is that I remember you were talking about that you would like to run for a local office. So, mhm,
Yeah, I mean, I say a lot of crazy shit, but
yeah.
I would definitely be open to it. I don't imagine that it would actually change anything, but I think that I could hold a lot of people and the status quo of politicians to account in debates and
Mhm,
stuff and just be like, this is all just doublespeak. I went to school for journalism and
mhm.
I think that journalists and politicians do a lot of lying and nobody ever like holds somebody's feet to the fire. But if I was in the race and I was in a debate, then I could just push back on everything and redefine those lines. And instead of like having the Democrats define the suitable left flank, then I could just be out there saying reasonable things to reasonable people, because I think that most people agree, like we were talking about. I think we're seeing a lot of that with Zoran Mandani, who I, also
Hmm.
have disagreements with, but I try
Yeah.
not to let perfect be the enemy of good. It shows like a pretty massive swing, and the midterms are looking like they are turning out similarly. So yeah, I would definitely consider it. I don't think I would win, but if you can just like churn up the waters and make people think, then I think that's a worthy thing.
Well, it's about the message, right? And
Yeah.
that's what it's
Hmm.
all about, and that's what's important. And I think you would be, I think you would do well. Don't I think you would do
Yeah.
well, and you speak very well, and you're very smart, and I think you would be a great candidate, and locally, and we'll see. You have to come up with some kind of nice slogan and stuff like that. So, and you make a good point, about like, we all have our little disagreements about things, but it's about the broader message, right? Because we're not all going to agree on every little thing, obviously. But it's about the broader message of doing better for the vulnerable and people that, don't have the voice. And, so,
Yeah.
but hey, maybe we'll see you in 2030 or something like that running.
Yeah.
So
If I'm
hey, and
still
you're gonna
around.
and I'll see you and I'll see you on WTW or
Yeah.
corporate right there.
Yeah. I could just imagine the field day that the Chicago media would have if the veteran who set the flag on fire outside of City Hall ran for office.
Mm.
But it'd
Yeah.
be fun, just
Uh,
like to kick up some shit.
Yeah, for my audience, it's Cam. He a couple years ago, he went to City Hall and he burned the American flag, but it was for a good reason, right? Because
Yeah.
he didn't want to burn himself,
Yeah.
and so
And also, that was the flag, like specifically that flag was a flag that I flew in Afghanistan, a
mhm,
place where I had no right to be. I had no right to fly our colors over it. The flag code, if that's a thing that you're interested in, says that the way that you're supposed to dispose of a flag is to burn it. So, like, um, it was twisted a lot in the media, and they very conveniently didn't quote anything that I said and just brought
yeah.
up the fact that I burnt it. But like, you know,
Eh,
uh,
well,
I think the
I
time for civility is over, and
well,
it
I
has
didn't
been
tell
for a
you.
long time.
Uh, well,
Sorry.
I was invited by the veteran community, by the aldermen, like the conservative aldermen, to like go and speak out about it. And I told one of my a friend of mine. He's like, well, you should, well, you can come if you want. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna come. I'm like, there's other things to worry about than some veteran that has the right to burn a flag. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
For at the time, I didn't know why he did it, but it was just like whatever. And he's a veteran. And then, but believe it or not, there was some veterans that were like standing up too. That said, like, why are we worried about this? We got other issues to worry about than some veteran that burned a flag, and he probably had some reasons before we knew. Before you really actually spoke out, he probably had his reasons for it. So it was just like, but they wanted city council wanted to use that to silence all the progressive,
Hmm.
and Lopez and all that, make an example and everything. And now you know how it works. You learn, things and everything. So, but yeah, I remember that. And I was like, no, I'm not going to go. And I'm not going to be sitting next to those aldermen that I could care less about, those races,
Yeah.
like, yeah, get out of here and stuff. But that's how I got to know you. So,
Yeah.
and everything. So, but anyways, I'm gonna close it down, and
Yep. Do your thing.
so thank you for coming on, Cam,
Thanks for
and I
having
really
me.
appreciate it, and I'm glad you're doing all this good work. Anyways, let's stay conscious, stay free, stay double V. Until next time, people.